Hello friends, I hope you're all doing well. My name is Brian, and today we're going to look at a few more stories from Reddit. If you enjoy Reddit stories, why not hit like, subscribe, and maybe even the notification bell. And now, let's move on to the first story of the day. With love, my friends. I'm 35, live in Ridgeport where the wind always smells like salt and coffee, and I still keep up with a ragtag cluster of college friends who once thought bottomless mimosas were a personality. One of them, let's call her Mara, 36, got engaged forever ago and finally set a January date after 2 years of mood boards and venue drama. Early on, she asked my daughter to be her flower girl. My kid, June, was 5 then and so thrilled she practiced tossing petals with cereal in our hallway. I said yes, of course. The dress showed up in a shiny white box 2 days later, soft as a cloud and exactly June's favorite shade of princess. Then life did what life does. The wedding date, originally last spring, slid down the calendar, then slipped again. I heard 3 explanations depending on which friend you caught: a vendor nightmare, a venue licensing hiccup, and a mysterious family thing that sounded like code for drama no one wanted to type in the group chat. Months passed. June grew like a weed watered with chocolate milk. I did the school runs, work deadlines, snack packs, repeat. The dress lived in her closet, zipped up like a secret. 10 days before January rolled around, I pulled the garment bag out to check it. One look and my stomach sank. The zipper stopped mid-back like it had hit a brick wall. I tried every mom trick, smoothing her undershirt, lifting her arms, the slow exhale, nope. I was the idiot who hadn't checked sooner. I texted Mara right away, hey. This is on me, but June's dress doesn't fit anymore. Where did you get it? I can overnight a bigger size, or find something similar, or have a tailor work magic. What do you want? Her first message back, figure it out. I stared at my phone. I typed, totally. Can you point me to the store or designer? Or okay, a different dress if I match it? I sent a photo of the label and 3 quick solutions. I was already Googling seamstresses. Her bubbles popped up, disappeared, popped up again. Then, I don't have time for this. Stop making your whale daughter my problem. I had to reread it because my brain refused to process those words lined up together. Whale. Daughter. My 6-year-old who still says Paschetti. My cheeks went hot. June was in the living room drawing hearts with too much glitter glue, humming that off-key kid hum. I turned my phone face down like it might leak poison. I didn't respond. Not then. Not after I paced my kitchen, not after I told myself she was stressed and wedding-brained and probably hadn't slept. I walked to the doorway, watched June shake glitter over everything like fairy snow, and knew exactly what I was going to do. I told Mara we wouldn't be attending. I kept it very simple: we're bowing out. I hope your day is beautiful. No lecture. No dragging. I blocked her notifications for the evening and made mac and cheese like it was any other Tuesday. The wedding happened without us. Our absence was obvious because June had been the only flower girl and because, well, our group is small enough that a missing person is a missing person. People started texting. Everything okay? You good? Mara said there was a tiny argument, nothing major. I didn't plan to be dramatic or petty. But I also wasn't going to let my kid become a politeness sacrifice. So when friends asked directly, I told them. Straight up. She called my daughter a whale because the dress didn't fit. I offered solutions. That's what happened. A couple of them asked if I was serious. I sent screenshots. No commentary, no emojis, no flames. Just the receipts. The response was immediate. Shock. A few choice words. One friend who never curses sent 3 in a row. I felt equal parts vindicated and nauseous. I hadn't wanted a bonfire, I just didn't want to lie. A week later, Mara called. I let it ring out twice, then picked up because avoidance is my least favorite personality trait. She sounded wrecked. She apologized for what she said about June, said she was under impossible pressure, that nothing had gone right, that I had no idea how thin her nerves were. She said it wasn't fair to lose friends over one mistake. She asked me to help clear the air. I listened. I said I needed time. Then I hung up and stared at the blue glow of my stove clock like it could tell me the moral answer. Was I wrong for skipping the wedding? No. But was I wrong for telling people exactly why? That's the knot I found myself picking at, long after the glitter had settled and the mac and cheese dishes were dry. After that text from Paige calling my daughter a whale, I sat at my kitchen table for what felt like an eternity, staring at my phone like maybe I'd misread it. Maybe autocorrect had betrayed her, maybe she meant something else, anything else. But nope, there it was in black and white: stop making your whale daughter my problem. I couldn't breathe for a second. It was like someone had smacked me in the chest. My daughter, my bright, bubbly, 6-year-old girl who still insists on wearing sparkly sneakers with every dress and thinks glitter is a personality trait, had just been reduced to that word. I snapped my phone shut and shoved it into my bag, but the words kept echoing. Whale. Like she wasn't even a little kid, but some burden Paige had to carry. I'm not going to lie, for a split second I wondered if I had been careless. I mean, yeah, I should have checked the dress earlier. It had been months, and kids don't exactly stay the same size. But what mom hasn't been juggling 1,000 things at once? And how on earth does forgetting to check a dress equal insulting a child's body? I didn't reply to her. I couldn't. I spent the rest of that day alternating between angry tears and waves of guilt. At one point, my daughter came bouncing in from the backyard with dirt on her knees, holding a rock she swore was a diamond. She asked if she could try on her flower dress. My throat closed up. I told her gently that the dress didn't fit anymore, but I'd find her something else. She shrugged and ran off, blissfully unaware that somewhere out there, a grown woman was calling her names she couldn't even spell yet. I decided then and there I wasn't going to the wedding. No way. I wasn't walking into that church with my child dressed in some makeshift backup outfit, pretending like Paige hadn't insulted her in the cruelest way. I knew people would notice our absence. After all, my daughter was supposed to be the only flower girl, but honestly, I didn't care. My loyalty was to my little girl, not Paige's perfect day. At first, I kept the whole thing quiet. I didn't blast it on social media, didn't text our mutual friends, didn't even vent to my mom. I just stepped back. But weddings are like gossip magnets, and when people saw we weren't there, questions rolled in fast. Why weren't you at Paige's wedding? Wasn't your daughter supposed to be in it? Did something happen? I thought about lying, saying I was sick or there was a family emergency. But every time I tried to type that out, the image of Paige's message flashed in my head. Why should I protect her? She hadn't protected my daughter. So, I told the truth. I said exactly what happened word for word, and even showed a couple of close friends the texts. I braced myself for judgment, for someone to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, every single one of them looked horrified. One friend actually said, "She called your kid a what?" No. Nope. Absolutely not. Another said she would have gone nuclear on Paige if it had been her child. Suddenly, I wasn't second-guessing myself anymore. Paige had crossed a line so deep it might as well have been the Grand Canyon. Of course, word got back to her. People talk, and our friend group is tight enough that nothing stays secret for long. I didn't make it a campaign, but I also wasn't about to sugarcoat anything. And when Paige tried to downplay it, telling people we'd just had a little argument, well, let's just say the screenshots spoke louder than her excuses. It didn't take long for her carefully curated image as the sweet, slightly stressed-out bride to crack. Once the truth was out, it spread faster than I expected. I hadn't meant for it to become a wildfire, but that's what happens in our little circle: drop a spark and suddenly the whole forest is glowing. I'd get random texts at odd hours. Wait, did she really call June that? I don't even know what to say. That's disgusting. And my personal favorite, from an old roommate: kids grow. That's what they do. Unless Paige expected your daughter to stay 5 forever, how on earth was this your fault? It was surreal. For so long, I had been the one turning the situation over and over in my head, wondering if maybe I'd messed up by not checking the dress sooner. But hearing other people react so strongly, it reminded me that no, I wasn't crazy. Forgetting to check a dress is normal. Insulting a child is not. The group chat we all share, which had been buzzing with wedding photos and post-event gossip, turned eerily quiet whenever Paige chimed in. People weren't engaging the way they used to. A couple even texted me privately to say they didn't know how to look at her the same way. Meanwhile, Paige wasn't exactly sitting quietly. She started calling people, trying to clarify what had happened. According to her, she'd been overwhelmed and said something out of line. The problem was that her version of out of line and the actual words she typed were galaxies apart. You don't accidentally type whale daughter. That isn't wedding stress. That's cruelty leaking out. She eventually called me directly. The number lit up my screen while I was folding laundry, and for a good 30 seconds, I debated letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity, or maybe morbid obligation, got the better of me. Her voice was tight, brittle around the edges. She apologized, kind of. More like she apologized for how it sounded than for what she actually said. You know, I didn't mean it literally, she told me, like that somehow erased the fact that she had put the words in writing. Then she shifted gears. She said I was ruining her friendships, that people were turning on her, that I had no idea how much pressure she was under. Do you really want me to lose everyone because of one mistake? And here's the thing, for half a second, I almost softened. I've been a bride. I know the stress, the endless decisions, the weird social juggling act. But then I glanced across the room where June was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, building an elaborate zoo out of Legos, and the softness evaporated. Because no matter how stressed I've ever been, I've never insulted a child, let alone someone else's child, let alone my friend's child. I told Paige calmly that while I understood stress, I would never excuse her words. I said I wasn't interested in repairing the friendship. She got quiet, and then she whispered, "So you're just going to throw everything away?" That line stuck with me for days. Because here's the truth, she threw it away the second she hit send. After that call, I stopped hearing from her directly. Instead, little ripples kept coming through our mutual friends. She'd try to explain herself, try to get sympathy, but the tide had already turned. The more she talked, the worse it seemed to get for her. And I wasn't celebrating her downfall, but I also wasn't losing sleep over it. My daughter had been protected. My boundary was clear. But what I didn't realize yet was that this was only the beginning of the fallout. The fallout wasn't an explosion, it was more like a slow leak that eventually flooded the whole basement. At first, it was just awkward silences in the group chat. Someone would share a meme or a new job update, and the usual flood of laughing emojis and replies would trickle in. Then Paige would chime in with something, and nothing. Crickets. Maybe a pity like from one person, but the lively energy just evaporated whenever her name popped up. Then came the side conversations. Friends would reach out privately to me, checking in, venting their disbelief. One of them said, "Honestly, it's not even about your daughter, it's the fact that she thought that was an acceptable thing to say to anyone." Another said, "She's been snappy with me too." Yours was just the worst case. That surprised me. I thought this whole thing was isolated, but apparently her bridezilla streak had been cutting deeper and wider than I realized. I kept repeating the same line whenever people asked, "I'm not mad anymore, but I won't forget what she said." It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't trying to blacklist her. I just wasn't going to cover up for her. The strangest moment came at brunch about a month later. A few of us met up at a cafe downtown, one of those trendy places with neon signs and overpriced lattes. Paige wasn't there, obviously, but her name hung in the air like smoke. One friend finally broke the silence and said, "I don't think I can hang out with her anymore." Heads nodded around the table. It hit me then that the friendship web we'd all spun back in college, messy, chaotic, but somehow holding, was unraveling. And not because I'd cut a single thread, but because Paige had pulled too hard on too many of them. She must have sensed it, because that's when she started reaching out again. This time, not with apologies exactly, but with requests. She texted me in June, "Can you please tell people we've talked?" They won't even answer my calls anymore. I just stared at the message. The audacity of it. Not I miss our friendship or I want to make things right, just help me with damage control. And yet, I surprised myself. I wrote back, "I told you I accepted your apology, but I don't want to be friends anymore. What others choose to do is up to them." That was it. Short, blunt, final. Afterward, I felt lighter. For months I'd been carrying this tension like a knot in my chest. Was I too harsh? Was I keeping people from reconciling? That text was me cutting the knot. She was free to spin her own version, free to rebuild whatever she could. But I was out. It's wild how quickly life shifted once I drew that line. Suddenly, my weekends weren't filled with endless group obligations or navigating someone else's drama. My circle shrank, but it also felt sturdier. The friends who stayed close? They were solid, the kind who send check-in memes when you've had a bad day or show up with donuts just because. And meanwhile, my daughter got her own happy ending. My cousin asked her to be a flower girl for their December wedding. The look on her face when she tried on that dress, a perfect fit, no nasty comments attached, was worth every ounce of drama. Still, sometimes at night, I'd replay Paige's words in my head, not because I doubted myself anymore, but because I couldn't believe she'd gone there in the first place. It takes less effort to say "let's figure it out" than it does to insult a child. And that was the real kicker, she could have chosen grace. She chose cruelty. If there's one thing I've learned about people, it's that when they feel the walls closing in, they'll scramble to save face instead of just sitting with their mistakes. That was Paige in the months after her wedding. I heard through mutuals that she was on this campaign to win people back. She'd call, she'd send these long texts about how much the friendships meant to her, about how she'd been in a bad place during the wedding planning. She'd sprinkle in little compliments, "You've always been so supportive, I miss that," like flares to reel people back. The problem was, no one was biting. Maybe one or two acquaintances softened enough to grab coffee with her, but the core group? The ones she'd known for over a decade? They were done. And honestly, I don't blame them. Because when you've seen someone tear down a 6-year-old, you start to wonder, if that's how they talk under stress, what's lurking under the surface the rest of the time? Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I wasn't rude, I wasn't dramatic, I just stopped showing up in spaces where she'd be. Friends respected that. Some of them tried to stay neutral, but you could tell even they were uncomfortable with how Paige was handling things. It wasn't about her mistake anymore, it was about her refusal to truly own it. She texted me again in July, one of those late-night, oversharing kinds of messages. "Some of the girls are talking to me again, but it's not the same. Are you still mad? Can't we fix this?" I stared at it for a while. Was I still mad? Not really. I wasn't walking around simmering with rage. But could I fix this? No. Some things don't unring. I told her as much. "I'm not mad. I wish you the best. But we can't be friends again. I can't look past what you said about my daughter." I added one last line, "It would have taken you less time to give me directions about the dress than it did to insult her." She never replied. That was the last time we spoke. And here's the twist, life went on. Not in some big cinematic way, but in quiet, steady little moments. My daughter thrived. She started soccer, lost her first tooth, learned how to ride her bike without training wheels. She still talked about being a flower girl, but now with excitement for the upcoming December wedding instead of disappointment from the one she'd missed. As for me, I felt like I had shed a skin I'd been itching in for years. Paige and I had been friends since college, but if I'm honest, it had been a friendship that required a lot of bending on my part. I'd brushed off snide remarks, laughed at passive-aggressive comments, told myself she was just blunt. This incident was the line in the sand I didn't realize I needed. Mutual friends noticed the change in me, too. One of them said, "You just seem lighter these days." And they were right. It's amazing how much mental real estate one toxic person can take up without you realizing it. Paige kept trying to pull people back into her orbit, but for me, she'd become a ghost. Not blocked, not erased, just irrelevant. And honestly, that irrelevance was the sweetest kind of peace. Life after Paige was oddly quiet. And in that quiet, I realized how much noise she used to generate. Not just the loud, dramatic kind of noise, but the constant low hum of tension you don't notice until it's gone. My circle of friends didn't exactly fracture when I stepped away, it just shifted. The group chats split off into smaller clusters, like little satellites orbiting their own calm. A few friends stayed in touch with Paige, but even they admitted it wasn't the same. "She's different now," one of them whispered to me over coffee, then quickly added, "not in a good way." What surprised me most was how natural it felt to let her fade out of my life. Normally, when a long friendship ends, there's this ache, a sense of loss. But with Paige, there was none of that. I didn't find myself reaching for my phone to text her. I didn't miss her commentary on my Instagram posts. It was as if my body had been carrying a weight for years, and only once it dropped did I realize how heavy it had been. Meanwhile, my daughter was thriving. The December wedding was approaching, and she was buzzing with excitement about being the flower girl again. This time, I double-checked the dress 3 times, lesson learned. Watching her twirl around in front of the mirror, her little sneakers peeking out under layers of tulle, I thought, this is how it should feel. Pure joy. No shadows attached. Every so often, Paige's name would still surface. A mutual friend would mention that she'd reached out again, trying to rebuild connections. Some people gave her that chance. Others didn't. I stayed firmly in the latter camp. Not out of malice, but because I had finally made peace with the truth. Just because someone was part of your history doesn't mean they get access to your future. And maybe the cruelest part for Paige was that I didn't even hate her anymore. Hate takes energy. I simply stopped caring. I could forgive her enough to stop carrying anger, but not enough to welcome her back. That distinction mattered to me. Looking back, it was almost poetic. Paige had obsessed for years about her perfect wedding, the curated Instagram moments, the lifelong memories. And yet, the thing people remembered most wasn't the decor or the dress, it was how she managed to alienate her closest friends by lashing out at a child. I'll admit, there were moments I felt a twinge of guilt. Not for skipping the wedding, not for telling the truth, but for the ripple effect it caused. Paige wanted sympathy, and instead, she ended up isolated. Sometimes I'd wonder, late at night, if she sat scrolling through her phone, replaying that text she sent me, wishing she could pull it back. But then I'd remember June's face when she tried on her new flower girl dress, smiling so wide her dimples nearly swallowed her cheeks, and the guilt would dissolve. Because in the end, my responsibility wasn't to salvage Paige's friendships. It was to protect my daughter. And on that front, I had zero regrets. By the time fall rolled around, Paige was on what I can only describe as a PR tour. She'd post inspirational quotes on Instagram stories about forgiveness and choosing love over anger, usually paired with heavily filtered selfies that screamed, "See, I'm the bigger person." A couple of friends rolled their eyes and sent screenshots to me with captions like, "We know who this is aimed at." I didn't engage. Not once. But silence has a way of speaking louder than any clapback could. Then came her last real attempt to claw her way back in. It happened at a friend's birthday dinner in October. I wasn't sure if Paige would show, but there she was when I walked in, sitting near the end of the table, hair perfectly curled, laughing a little too loud. I felt my stomach dip for a second, but I reminded myself, she had no power over me anymore. The night rolled on, small talk bouncing around, plates of tapas passed from hand to hand. And then, somewhere between the second and third round of margaritas, Paige decided to make her move. She leaned across the table, voice pitched just enough for everyone to hear, and said, "I still feel terrible about how things went down with the wedding. I hope you know I didn't mean what I said about your daughter." The table went silent. Forks hovered mid-air. You could practically hear the record scratch. I set my glass down slowly and looked her dead in the eye. "You don't get to walk it back now. You said what you said. I've moved on, but I'm not forgetting it. We're not friends anymore, Paige, and that's okay. You don't have to keep trying." I kept my voice calm, no yelling, no dramatics, but the firmness landed. A couple of people at the table nodded subtly, like they'd been waiting for me to say it out loud. Paige's face tightened, her eyes flicking around to see if anyone would jump in to defend her. No one did. She tried to laugh it off, mumbling something about wedding stress, but the conversation had already shifted. Someone cracked a joke, the noise level rose again, and Paige was left swirling her drink, quieter than she'd been all night. That was the moment I knew she was done. Not just with me, but with the whole group. You could feel it. The invisible cord she'd been tugging on for months finally snapped. Afterward, a friend pulled me aside and whispered, "You handled that perfectly. You gave her closure without giving her power." I hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe that's exactly what it was, me putting the period at the end of a sentence she kept trying to stretch into a paragraph. From that night on, she faded. She stopped popping up in the group chat, stopped reaching out, stopped trying to spin her story. I think she finally realized there was no saving face here. And honestly, the peace that followed was incredible. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. I no longer replayed those texts in my head at night. The chapter was closed. What surprised me most wasn't the loss of Paige, it was the gain of clarity. I finally understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight for an old friendship, but to let it die with dignity. And in doing so, I carved out space for the people who mattered most. Once Paige drifted out of the picture, the group felt lighter. There's no other word for it. It wasn't like everyone sat down and officially cut her off. It was quieter than that, no more forced invites, no more awkward silences in the chat, no more holding our collective breath waiting for the next jab disguised as a joke. We started doing smaller hangouts. Movie nights. Board games at someone's apartment. Brunches where we actually laughed instead of playing mediator. It felt like the friendships I'd signed up for back in college, messy but warm, chaotic but kind. Without Paige's sharp edges, the group settled into something softer. Every so often, her name would come up. Usually in passing, like, "Oh, did you see Paige posted that yoga retreat photo?" But it was never with venom, never with interest. Just a mention, then gone. She had become background noise in a story where she used to dominate the whole page. Meanwhile, my daughter's second chance at flower girl duty was getting closer. My cousin's wedding was set for December, and June couldn't stop talking about it. She'd try on her dress weekly, practicing her pedal toss with everything from confetti to popcorn. Sometimes she'd run around the living room chanting, "Flower girl. Flower girl," like it was a superhero identity. It was bittersweet, watching her excitement. On one hand, I was so grateful she was getting the experience she'd been promised before. On the other, it broke my heart a little that her first taste of this had been marred by Paige's cruelty. Kids don't remember the fine print, though, they remember the glitter, the twirling, the smiles. And thank God for that. As for me, I found myself reflecting a lot in those months. About how long I tolerated Paige's barbed comments because I'd convinced myself that's just who she was. About how many times I'd smoothed things over to keep the peace. About how much of myself I'd set aside for the sake of a friendship that, in hindsight, was more obligation than joy. I realized something simple but powerful: peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, it comes from choosing who deserves a seat at your table. And Paige no longer did. By the time December rolled around, I was ready for the closure that wedding would bring. Not the big, cinematic kind of closure, but the quiet kind, the kind where you watch your kid walk down an aisle with a basket of petals, smiling so wide her whole face glows, and you know you made the right choice. And when that day finally came, that's exactly what I felt. Watching June scatter petals with all the solemnity of a tiny queen, I didn't think once about Paige. Not about the texts, not about the gossip, not about the friendship that died. All I thought was, this is how it should have been all along. The December wedding felt like a reset button for both me and my daughter. It wasn't my wedding, but it healed a piece of me that had been bruised since that January disaster. We arrived early, and June clutched her little basket like it was treasure. The dress fit perfectly this time, I must have checked the zipper 3 times before we left the house. She had insisted on wearing sparkly sneakers underneath because, as she explained, flower girls need to run fast in case of emergencies. I didn't argue. Honestly, it was the most practical logic I'd heard all season. When the music started, she took her role with a seriousness that made the whole room smile. She walked slowly, sprinkling petals with such deliberate precision you'd think the fate of the wedding depended on their placement. Guests were whispering, pointing, smiling. That's what a flower girl is supposed to be. Pure joy. Innocence. No drama attached. I teared up, of course. Not just because of the cuteness overload, but because it felt like closure. This was the moment Paige had stolen from her. But here it was, handed back by family who actually valued her. My cousin hugged her afterward and said, "You did the best job in the world." June grinned so hard I thought her cheeks might crack. For me, it wasn't just about redemption, it was about perspective. Watching her twirl around on the dance floor later that night, tulle bouncing, laughter spilling out of her like sunlight, I realized something: kids don't hold grudges the way adults do. June wasn't carrying Paige's insult in her pocket, replaying it at night. She wasn't bitter that her first dress hadn't fit. To her, life was a series of sparkly sneakers and petal baskets. The wound was mine, not hers. And maybe that was my lesson. I had carried Paige's words like stones in my chest, weighing me down, replaying them in my head as proof that I'd failed my daughter somehow. But in reality, I hadn't failed her. I'd protected her. I'd chosen her joy over someone else's ego. That was the job. That was the win. After the wedding, a few mutual friends asked again if I'd reconsider talking to Paige. I didn't get angry this time. I just smiled and said, "No, I'm good." And I meant it. Not with bitterness, not with resentment, just with the kind of calm that comes when you finally stop picking at a scar and let it fade. That night, when June fell asleep in the back seat on the drive home, still clutching her empty basket, I glanced at her in the mirror and felt lighter than I had in months. Paige wasn't in the picture anymore. And honestly, neither was the hurt. I'd finally stepped out of the shadow of her words. And what I found waiting for me wasn't anger or guilt. It was peace. Looking back now, months after it all settled, I see the story less as losing a friend and more as shedding a layer that no longer fit. Paige and I had history, sure. We'd shared dorm rooms, late-night takeout runs, road trips where we got hopelessly lost and ended up laughing in parking lots. But history doesn't excuse cruelty. And it doesn't guarantee a future. When she called my daughter a whale, she didn't just make a mistake under stress. She revealed something. Words don't come out of nowhere, they bubble up from how someone really sees you, or in this case, how she really saw my little girl. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. What this whole ordeal taught me is that protecting my daughter is non-negotiable, even if it means cutting ties with someone I once considered family. Because when you're a parent, the loyalty line shifts. It isn't about keeping every old friend happy. It's about building a world where your child knows they are safe and valued. And honestly, Paige losing friends wasn't my doing. It was hers. People saw her for who she was in that moment, and they made their choices. Actions have consequences, that's not vengeance, that's just reality. My friendships now are fewer, but stronger. The people who stuck around are the ones who text to check in, who show up without being asked, who would never dream of insulting a child even at their worst. That's the kind of circle I want my daughter to grow up around. And as for June? She doesn't remember Paige's text, thank God. What she remembers is twirling on a December dance floor, her basket of petals empty and her sneakers covered in frosting from sneaking too many cupcakes. That's the memory she carries forward, the one she deserves. I still get the occasional update about Paige. She's out there, trying to stitch together her circle again, probably still telling herself wedding stress was to blame. Maybe one day she'll learn the real lesson. Maybe she won't. But either way, it's not my burden to carry anymore. The last time someone brought her up, I surprised myself by shrugging and saying, "I hope she's doing okay." And I meant it. Not because I want her back in my life, but because I've truly moved on. What I know now is this: friendships aren't tested in the easy seasons. They're tested in the moments when things don't go as planned, when stress is high, when people show you who they really are. And once someone shows you, believe them. So no, I don't regret missing her wedding. I don't regret telling the truth. And I definitely don't regret walking away. Because in the end, I didn't just protect my daughter from one ugly word. I showed her that we never, ever settle for being treated as less than we are. And that lesson? That's worth more than any friendship I left behind. So much for being here. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care. And much love.